this section of the Torah. We see this particular section from Leviticus, the end of Leviticus 22 and Leviticus 23. And I'll skip a couple verses in there. I'll tell you when I'm doing that. It begins at the end of Leviticus 22. And you shall keep my mitzvot, my commandments, and do them. I am Adonai. And you shall not profane my holy name, but I will be made holy among the children of Israel. I am Adonai, who makes you holy, that brought you out of the land of Egypt to be your God. I am Adonai. And Adonai spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the children of Israel and say to them, the appointed seasons of Adonai, which you shall proclaim to be holy convocations, even these are my appointed seasons. 6 days shall work be done, but on the seventh day is a Sabbath of solemn rest, a holy convocation. You shall do no manner of workmanship, perhaps is the better translation, workmanship. It is a Sabbath unto Adonai in all your dwellings. These are the appointed seasons of Adonai, even holy convocations, which you shall proclaim in their appointed season. And then it begins to talk a bit about Passover. And at verse 15, we'll pick up, it says, and you shall count unto yourselves from the day after the day of rest, from the day that you brought the sheaf or the omer of waving, of grain for waving, 7 weeks shall there be complete, even until the day after the 7th week. You shall number 50 days. And you shall present a new meal offering unto Adonai. And you shall bring out of your dwellings 2 wave loaves of 2/10 parts of an ephah. They shall be of fine flour. They shall be baked with leaven for the first fruits unto Adonai. And skipping a few more details of some of those sacrifices. The priest shall wave them with the bread of the first fruits for a wave offering before Adonai, with the 2 lambs. They shall be holy to Adonai for the priest. And you shall make proclamation on the selfsame day, the 50th day. There shall be a holy convocation to you. You shall do no manner of servile work. It is a statute forever in all your dwellings throughout your generations. And when you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not entirely reap the corner of your field, neither shall you gather what has dropped onto the field of your harvest. You shall leave them for the poor and for the stranger. I am Adonai, your God. I note, first of all, that this section has in chapter 23 an entire cycle of the major biblical holidays. These are the holidays which you shall proclaim, but it actually starts with every day. We dismiss the part, it says 6 days you shall work, but on the Sabbath you shall cease from working. We tend to look at that and say it's talking about the Sabbath, but it's also talking about every day. 6 days you shall be laboring and creating and being productive. And then on the 7th day, you step back and say, okay, what's it all about anyway? Why are we working? What's it all mean? So Shabbat is that time to take a look at what does it all mean? It's kind of an answer to Camus' riddle about, or statement that all of life is absurd. Well, there's no meaning to it. Well, Shabbat, we're saying, no, yes, there is. There's meaning to it. We'll discuss that later. What is that meaning? Not necessarily today. We'll discuss it. What also we find in this section is the discussion about the Omer. The counting of the Omer, that is what I chose to focus on. We no longer bring an Omer or a measure of grain to the temple each day between Passover and Shavuot. The Torah talks about counting 50 days from Passover all the way to Shavuot, which means weeks. It's the Feast of Weeks because it's a week of weeks, 49 days plus one more, 50 days. We don't bring that grain, but just as with the other sacrificial traditions, we study them, we remember them, we mark them, we do count. We count 50 days, just as the Torah commands, because we can do that much. We can count the days, even though we cannot bring grain offerings to the temple, to a temple which doesn't exist. And if we cannot do something, then we're not required to do it. That's a basic principle in Jewish law. If you can't do it, you're not required to do it. So we're not required to bring the sacrifices. We're not required to bring the grain. We can't do that, but we do count. Today has been, the day that just ended, Friday, Thursday night Friday, has been Lag BaOmer. It's been Lag BaOmer all day, the 33rd day of the Omer. It's a significant day. Why is it called Lag BaOmer? Lamed has the numerical value of 30, and Gimel has the numerical value of 3. So Lag BaOmer. It's a significant day. It's a significant day because the period of the Omer, that whole counting of the Omer, 50 days from Passover to Shavuot, the period of the Omer traditionally is a sad and mournful time. Why? Well, it's not really clear, but it's a tradition. No music, no weddings, no haircuts. But Lag BaOmer is a totally different day. It is joyful. So to mark that difference, we traditionally do all those things we can't do the day before. It's a day of music, it's a day of haircuts. If there's a wedding to be had, it's a day of weddings. It's a time of joy. Why? Well, there is a legend. There's a legend about Rabbi Akiva and his students. Rabbi Akiva lived about the year 130 CE, in the middle of the second Jewish revolt against Rome, actually. But Rabbi Akiva, there's a legend about Rabbi Akiva. His students experienced a plague. And on the 33rd day of the Omer, the plague stopped. So we celebrate. That's the legend. Now, it's certainly something we could celebrate now. We have been reminded of the real possibilities and consequences of epidemics. We know firsthand a little about the joy of experiencing the end of a period of plague, or soon, hopefully, we will know firsthand. It may also be, historians point out, maybe that legend, maybe Rabbi Akiva's students were those revolting against Rome, but that's a whole other story. Maybe Rome is the plague. But in any case, there is a more generalizable lesson to be had here. And that is, in the midst of any time of sadness or difficulty, such as what the Omer represents, in the midst of any time of sadness or difficulty, we still may find sparks of joy, like Lag BaOmer. Indeed, we should seek out sparks of joy. There are times when the Torah even commands that we should rejoice, just because it is the time to rejoice. The Torah several times says that on most of our major holidays, you shall rejoice. You shall rejoice. It's actually a command. You're going to be joyful whether you feel like it or not. Joy is an affirmation of life. When we rejoice, we are affirming life. And the Torah commands that we should choose life. Therefore, there are times when we should actively choose to rejoice, as counterintuitive as that may sound. And at no time is it more important to choose to rejoice than in times of difficulty. So, just like at times of weddings, when we break a glass to remind us in the midst of joy that we do encounter times of sorrow, so too at times of sadness do we actively seek sparks of joy. Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav, who lived until 1809, he was the founder of the Bratslav Hasidim. He used to teach mitzvah gadola liyot b'simcha. It is the great mitzvah to be joyful. Being joyful is an affirmation of life. I think also it is very significant that the section of Torah, which we looked at today, the section of Torah that speaks of counting the Omer and celebrating the Feast of Weeks, Shavuot, leads directly to the mitzvah of sharing your harvest and abundance with the poor. Specifically, we read, and when you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not entirely reap the corner of your field, neither shall you gather the gleaning or the things that have dropped into your field. You shall leave them for the poor and for the stranger. I am Adonai your God. Celebration and rejoicing should be integrated with justice, tzedakah, and the honoring of human dignity. Religious celebration and rejoicing, indeed, should lead to justice, tzedakah, and the honoring of human dignity. This section of Torah that we read as well, which describes the basic cycle of Jewish holidays, is immediately preceded by the command to sanctify the name of God and not to desecrate the name of God. Some of you may know the expression, a chilul Hashem. Something was a chilul Hashem. Something is a desecration of God's name. If we do something if we as a Jewish community do something that is terrible, then we've desecrated God's name somehow. The 3 verses which I started with reading tonight, at the end of Leviticus 22, you shall keep my commandments and do them. I am Adonai. You shall not desecrate my holy name, but I will be made holy among the children of Israel, for I am Adonai who makes you holy, that brought you out of the land of Egypt to be for you a God. I am Adonai. Each of us is created in the image of God. Each of us is created in the image of God. So we can choose to sanctify the name of God by taking the image in which we are created and investing ourselves in mitzvot and good deeds. Or we can equally choose to desecrate the name of God by taking the image in which we are created and dragging that image through the mud of injustice and cruelty. And religious commemoration and celebration should move us towards the pole of mitzvot and good deeds, not cruelty and desecration. We can look both at Jewish and non-Jewish examples. We can see an example of the power that religious commemoration can have to move people towards honoring dignity, justice, and peace. We can see an example of that, actually, when we look at the possibilities that are sometimes demonstrated in connection to Ramadan, which some of our Muslim neighbors are celebrating this month. This week I read this article in the Jerusalem Post, and I've excerpted it. It begins by saying, a joint Israeli-Palestinian hotel in Hebron near the Cave of the Patriarchs might sound like a pipe dream in a city that has been a historic flashpoint of conflict, but it was a vision that the administrative head of Hebron's Jewish community laid out late Tuesday night when he visited the home of a city resident, prominent Palestinian businessman, for an iftar celebration, a break the fast celebration to mark the end of the daily Ramadan fast. Hebron is it's considered one of the four holy cities. In Jewish tradition, Hebron is considered one of the four holy cities in the land of Israel. We have Jerusalem, Tiberias, Hebron, Jerusalem, Tiberias, Hebron, and Tzfat, where Lecha Dodi was written. Hebron is where you find the tomb of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, and Leah. And it is a holy site to Jews, and it is a holy site to Muslims, and they're fighting over it all the time. And there was a massacre in 1929 where the Arab community massacred Jews, and no one's ever forgotten. And there was a shooting in, 1993 where a Jewish man massacred Muslim worshipers, and no one has ever forgotten. Not that these things should be forgotten, but they need to be overcome. And yet, in Hebron this year, for the second year in a row, there were iftars, break the fast meals during Ramadan between Palestinians living in Hebron and some of the most ardent Jewish settlers living in Kiryat Arba, right there. And one of the things they're starting to dream about is let's have a joint hotel where everybody who has feels some common connection to Abraham could come and stay. So there was this iftar. The Jewish participants, including a heavy contingent from the settler movement, were offered a kosher meal of rice, chicken, green beans, hummus, and falafel, catered from the nearby Kiryat Arba settlement. This leader, whose name was Horowitz, was one of a number of people who gave public speeches and toasted the gathering with small paper cups of black coffee, wishing the Palestinians in the room a Ramadan Kareem. Former Likud minister Ayub Kara, a long-time acquaintance of Jabari, of this businessman, drove all the way from northern Israel to attend the event. The council, the head of a settlers council in Efrat, brought a plate of chocolate, and the head of another council brought a basket of dried fruits. One of them had hosted the Palestinian businessman in his sukkah, and the other had earlier celebrated Hanukkah with them. Among those who arrived for the first time was the head of the Yesha Council, Yigal Dilmoni, for whom it was an eye-opening event with regards to the possibilities of coexistence. He said, "I'm 50 years, and this is the first time I'm participating in an iftar celebration." That man, who was the son of parents who immigrated to Israel from Afghanistan, recalled the good relations that Jews had with their neighbors in Afghanistan. Jews and Arabs, Jews and Muslims lived for many years together. He said, "It's not a new thing, it's an ancient thing that has been renewed, and I think it will only grow and expand." The initial steps, actually, some of their initial discussion was about the economy, about like this joint hotel, for example, but those initiatives can lead to real friendships that can tighten the bonds of neighbors around common issues. So indeed, the Settlers Council had recently turned to the health ministry in Israel and to the military to urge them to provide vaccines for the Palestinians, arguing that the virus does not distinguish between people and is a danger to everyone. And another settler council leader noted that language is a major problem, and noted that or suggested that Arabic classes should be held throughout all the settler communities to help promote joint dialogue. At the same time, though, that this iftar and Ramadan is being used to, and clearly also Hanukkah and Sukkot has been used to try to promote dialogue. We've also seen recent examples in Jerusalem of riots this month that are actually being complicated by religious observance. So we must keep in mind that the flame of faith can both enlighten and burn. And indeed, it has burned people at the stake many times over the centuries. We can use religion and religious practice and religious commitment to sanctify or to desecrate, to bring people together or to tear people apart. We must embrace and uphold our obligation to see to it that the flame of faith enlightens rather than burns. We must remember to sanctify God's name, not to desecrate God's name, and to seek sparks of joy even in moments of difficulty. Shabbat Shalom.